Here's an interesting story for you. Violent attacks on retail staff have almost tripled since 2016. This is according to the most recent government figures.
A new report shows that many workers suffer anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that. And Ben is having a bit of a look at it for us. Morning.
Yeah, morning to you. Yeah, it's that idea of not just having to endure that attack or that robbery. It's the impact that it's having on those staff after and whether there's enough help for those staff to deal with it. Thanks very much, Ed. Morning to you. Shop workers apparently facing increasing levels of violence, and those victims often suffering mental symptoms that are more commonly associated with frontline police or army officers. Well, we spoke to one victim, that's Yusuf. He told us his story. Now, the co-op that he works in Greater Manchester was robbed in June. He was on a shift with colleagues. We're going to show you a bit of what happened and hear his story. Just a little warning that the footage includes images of that attack and the knife that was used, but fortunately, we should say, no one was physically hurt.
It was a Saturday night, it's the usual shift, nothing from memory, nothing out of the ordinary. I was on the shop floor at the time, but I'd just stepped into the back. And it was as I'd stepped into the back, that was when we heard the beep of the door, and that was when I heard the call from Molly. She was terrified. No one can blame her for it. You know, she was really beside herself with sort of fear. When I opened the door for behind the till, that was when the guy turned towards me and I first saw the knife. All you see is the knife. That's all that goes through your mind. And with the way he was coming at me, I did think I was going to get stabbed. It was terrifying, you know. It's not something you forget.
Yeah, and that point about it being not something you forget, that's the emotional impact, of course. Well, let's talk about that with Dr. Emmeline Taylor, who is a criminologist at the University of London, and you carried out some of this research, didn't you? So welcome to you. Look, cases of this nearly tripling over the last few years. I mean, that's since 2016. A staggering increase. What is driving this increase in crime and then the violence that goes with it?
It certainly is alarming. There's multiple data sources that show that shop workers are experiencing heightened levels of violence and also verbal abuse. This has been put at 115 physical attacks every single day. Right. The co-op, realising that this simply wasn't being taken seriously by government and that more needed to be done to raise awareness, commissioned an independent report to examine what the factors were that were underpinning this rise. There's four main scenarios that the research have identified that is really driving violence and verbal abuse against shop workers. And they are encountering shoplifters. Over 5 million incidents of shop theft occur every single year. It's also enforcing age-restricted sales and other legislation around prohibited items. We're also seeing, sadly, a rise in hate-motivated incidents and then, of course, armed robbery, similar to the video that you've just shown. So these four scenarios are really becoming quite prevalent in our shops.
And so, as we said, utterly awful to have to experience that as a worker, but therefore it's what comes after that is often most troubling, isn't it? The anxiety, the trauma that goes with it. I mean, is enough help being offered for those workers if they experience something like this?
You're absolutely right there, Ben, because the aftermath of these incidents is really what is quite concerning. So they stem far beyond physical attacks, which in themselves are, of course, upsetting, but we're also seeing some very serious and long-lasting mental health consequences. So shop workers experiencing panic attacks, anxiety, and even in the most serious incidents, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the report shows that there's 7 key recommendations that I believe, if implemented, would begin to stem the tide of these violence incidents occurring in shops.
Yeah, give me a sense of what they are, because we know, for example, some supermarkets in city centres now have security guards on the door, and they might help, I suppose, enforce some of that thing about selling, you know, alcohol to people who are underage, for example. It's not going to necessarily stop some of the cases that we saw in Yusuf's example.
There needs to be a concerted effort with industry and the government coming together with communities in order to tackle violence, not just in our shops but also on our streets. These 7 recommendations stem legislative changes, for example, as well as an awareness campaign that really drives home that there's zero tolerance towards violence against shop workers.
Yeah, it's really harrowing to see some of that, isn't it? Emmeline, really good to see you. Thanks for explaining all of that for us. Dr. Emmeline Taylor there, the criminologist who carried out some of this research into that violence against shop workers. We'll talk more about that a little later, but I'll be back after 8. I'll see you then.
Yeah, you can see the impact. Thank you both very much.